Welcome, everyone, to the National Outdoor Learning Initiative Community of Practice for Schools and Districts Moving Learning Outside. This is meeting 50. We've been meeting since June 2020, if you can believe it, as part of the National COVID-19 Outdoor Learning Initiative that was begun around that time in partnership with Green Schoolyards America, the Lawrence Hall of Science, the San Mateo County Office of Education, and 10 Strands. Our meeting today is going to be hosted by myself, Lauren McKenna. I'm a program manager with Green Schoolyards America, and Nancy Sternesty, Director of East Coast Programs. We are very excited to hear from two parent advocates, one in California and one in Maryland. So Joanna Snyder and Aleigh Lewis, both of them have been hard at this work for quite some time. I know Joanna's been a part of the National COVID-19 Outdoor Learning Initiative, and Aleigh, being in Los Angeles, certainly has her work cut out for her. So as introductions for both of them, Joanna has been a curriculum specialist at the Lawrence Hall of Science at UC Berkeley for almost 14 years. She develops K-8 hands-on science, classroom curriculum, and outdoor ecology activities. Her experience and expertise includes helping teachers extend their classrooms out into their schoolyards, and her work has supported school initiatives in San Francisco, Boston, and Louisville. As her eldest child entered kindergarten during the pandemic, she found herself in new territory, navigating the politics of parent advocacy around more equitable response and recovery efforts. And Aleigh Lewis, who is in Los Angeles, is a parent advocate and community organizer for outdoor children-centered play and learning opportunities. She started a loose parts recess program at Mount Washington Elementary School in Los Angeles in 2018, which uses recycled open-ended materials to encourage collaborative creative play. She has since founded the parent advocacy group Angelinos for Green Schools, which supports the equitable transformation of all schoolyards into green spaces. Aleigh is also working with 2 elementary schools to plant a Miyawaki mini forest near their campuses, which will be used as an outdoor classroom. We are so grateful for the example that Aleigh is setting for schools and communities in Southern California, and Joanna, the example you're setting in your location of Silver Spring, Maryland. So without further ado, take it away.
And I'll also start by saying Aleigh and I found each other because of your wonderful breakout rooms. So that's where our work together started. So thank you for those. I've made so many amazing connections and look forward to making more. So Aleigh and I were talking after we met in a breakout room, and it became really clear there were some interesting parallels and common themes to our very different paths of parent advocacy, both in Maryland and California. So we wanted to share our stories with you, and hopefully some of you can take that on to apply it to other areas. So I want to start by giving just a little bit of the landscape of our two the areas where the districts we're working in, because they're pretty different, especially mainly in size. So LAUSD is the second largest to New York City in the country, with a unfortunately dropping student body, currently estimated right now at about 440,000 students, with about 1,300 schools. And while the number of students might be dropping, their operating budget very exciting to see that it has increased. So hopefully that will help with a lot of the work Alleigh's trying to get going. So they have an operating budget of the coming year of almost $14 billion, which is amazing. Montgomery County Public Schools, we're much smaller, but we're still in that kind of middle range. We're about the 15th largest in the country, estimated right now, largest in Maryland. And we have about 160,000 students. And you can see the biggest difference here is we have only about 200 schools. So definitely size challenges, but nothing like some of those in LA. And our budget kind of mirrors about the size kind of thing for schools at about $3 billion this coming year, which again is exciting. I think a lot of that has to do with ESSER funds. So hopefully things are being put where they can be. A little about kind of my path here. So as Lauren mentioned, I work for the Lawrence Hall of Science as a curriculum specialist, one of the co-founders of the National Outdoor COVID Initiative. So I've been kind of following and participating where I can from the beginning. My work at the Hall has involved mainly classroom curriculum, but my colleague Erica Beck-Spencer, who is on this call, she and I have gotten to play for over 14 years on helping teachers use their schoolyard. So I've seen this in action. I've seen teachers go from the high, crossed arms of why am I forced to be here to a leader and trying to integrate beyond even our suggestions how to use their schoolyard. So I came to this kind of pandemic with the knowledge that this works and teachers get on board when you find their entry point. Erica and I also during the pandemic developed some home connection resources, and I will put these in the chat for everybody in a bit to have access to. Actually, I can do that before I forget. You can see in those two documents some other resources as well, but so these are all free for use. Just can't print them and sell them. And so I have this, almost 2 decades of work in this realm, and then was very humbled as my eldest daughter entered kindergarten last year, and very quickly was swept into a lot of the parent advocacy happening in our county, which I'll say a little bit more about that structure in a minute. But where our county has a lot of fear of going outdoors, the pandemic drove them outside because the fear indoors became greater. So I kind of hopped onto this groundswell of interest and drive for outdoor lunch to be possible, which is a pretty big spot to start if you're kind of an indoor district. But over last spring, parents really rallied to the cause with the PTAs, which is a very big driver of kind of change in our district. And so you can see here on the left, that was a whole bunch of picnic tables built by the parents, bought by the PTA. The center is how one of the high schools took over. They closed the bus loop and put out tables. The high schoolers love eating outside for lunch. And then on the right, some of our most successful elementary schools that are still doing it figured out they could drag their cafeteria tables outside pretty easily. So they would essentially set up their cafeteria outdoors. Kind of taking my hat from my experience and looking for the systemic ways to get involved, I was able to connect with our facilities department and create a resource that I'll also throw in the chat in a minute for our principals, because what I found is principals didn't know what they had, but some of them were open to it and also getting tired of hearing parents complain. The district also offered some materials, although it wasn't as big of a systemic push as we were hoping for. So the last document is actually showing we had a massive petition and we ended up creating a crowdsourced scorecard where people could submit a score for their school's level of outdoor participation in outdoor dining. And so there was a lot of momentum last spring that didn't transfer very well into this fall. And so I've been kind of looking for our new path. I will just say something about my structure. So I wanted to be a remora. So we latched on to a county council of PTA structure that exists. And so quickly I was swept into that advocacy work early on last year and have now found a new home there with an established Green Schools subcommittee within our CIP efforts. That also is part of a state-driven element that Maryland has for this Green School certification. It is part of our state mandates. And so that's where we had a lot of support from our facilities department, because they're being told they have to do this. So they're kind of on board in some ways. There is some real social media kind of budding work. And I'm hoping also to jump on other things like our climate action and watershed initiatives. But just kind of a really quick overview of where we're headed. I think the outdoor lunch, it's flaring up again. We have massive outbreaks right now in our schools. So parents are contacting me about outdoor lunch again. There's a lot of staff fatigue for that one. So we're shifting more towards this outdoor wellness path. to be part of the mental health and academic recovery, which is a big piece of our schools. So that's kind of our hope in I see where we might have a venue moving forward. All right, Aleigh.
Hi, my name is Aleigh Lewis. I'm one of the founders of the parent advocacy group Angelenos for Green Schools in Los Angeles. Briefly before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge Sharon Danks for your vision for Green Schoolyards. It's been tremendously influential for our advocacy work, and really everything that we're doing would be nothing without the foundation that you've built. As you can see in Los Angeles, we are in a very urban area, and there's often very little tree cover on schoolyards, and they're all very hot. With rising temperatures and extended periods of drought, we are very motivated to create schoolyards that will be places that are ecologically functioning, that provide shade, capture stormwater, provide habitat for wildlife, and most of all, where kids can freely be outside to play and learn. Next slide. We are a group of parents who initially came together last year to discuss hurdles we were facing with our respective greening projects at our kids' schools. We're all passionate about climate resilience and outdoor learning, and we started to realize that there needed to be a much broader advocacy effort beyond just our schools, because all schools need access to greening resources, especially areas that are impacted by higher temperatures and higher rates of pollution. Given that LAUSD, Los Angeles Unified School District, is the largest landowner in Los Angeles County, owning over 6,400 acres, we know that if LAUSD were to adopt a fully funded district-wide greening program, it would have an enormous impact on the health of our environment, which would lead to improving the mental and physical health of our students, caregivers, teachers, and neighborhoods. As you can see here in this graphic by Trust for Public Land, if all schools were green and communities had access to these schoolyards on the weekends, it would significantly increase available park space in our city. It would help decrease temperatures, clean the air, and provide habitat for wildlife. Next slide. So we decided to focus our efforts on creating a parent advocacy group that would focus on roughly 4 goals. The first goal is to create a centralized resource of local information for students, caregivers, and teachers, using the Green Schoolyards America and Children in Nature Network websites as a jumping off point. We created a website that could raise awareness around what is greening? Why do certain parts of the city need to be prioritized over others? What are the components of greening? What are the best practices? What are things to avoid? What are local case studies of green schools in Los Angeles? What are state and national examples of green school districts? What is outdoor learning and why is it important? And how all these benefits tie together and create these interconnected benefits for the environment, students, and teachers. So this is with the overall goal that if we design to benefit nature instead of at the expense of nature, we all are better off. Next slide. The second attention is to bring attention to local people in Los Angeles doing great work around green schoolyards and urban farming through Instagram. This is an attempt to personalize the effort so that people can see themselves in these stories and want to get involved. Next slide. The third goal is mobilizing parents, students, and teachers to advocate for green schoolyards. This can look like creating relationships with school board members, principals, speaking during public comment at a school board meeting, showing up at district events, contacting the superintendent. We are currently organizing around the new teacher union contract, which includes green spaces as one of its key demands. Another one of our immediate goals is to partner with an environmental justice organization, because it's really important that this movement is driven by people who are impacted the most by higher temperatures and pollution in Los Angeles. Next slide. The fourth goal is the hardest. We can make cute websites and Instagram posts all we want, but unless actual change is happening on schoolyards, all this talk is, not worth it. While we advocate for a more comprehensive district-wide greening policy, we ask, what are the tangible things that can happen in the meantime? How can we get kids learning outside, even if they don't have a green schoolyard? How can we be planting some trees on campuses to create some shade on schoolyards? How can we be planting small habitat gardens to boost biodiversity and have an outdoor classroom experience? How can we be composting lunch and diverting it to an industrial composting facility? How can we start with small changes that help build our way to building confidence and excitement within the community? And Joanna, it's your turn.
Yeah. So those are really quick overviews of our two stories. And of course, we're both available to talk to anybody as much as they want to hear about them, probably. But with some of the common themes we noticed for anybody really trying to get started is finding that central communication for parents. So in my case, I was able to link on to the established Montgomery County Council of PTAs as an existing structure. For Aleigh, she had to create one from scratch, which is, in my opinion, very remarkable. And you should definitely check out her website. It's incredible. In addition, we started thinking about that concept of being a remora. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to work off existing momentum that is there, whether it's in structure or in initiatives. So for my county and state, we have the Maryland Green Schoolyards Act, or Green Schools Act. We have Montgomery County Climate Action Plan. Our district has a sustainability plan as part of that. There is a robust watershed agreement in this area for Chesapeake Bay. And then Maryland State Department of Environmental Ed has a lot of robust standards and requirements we can work off.
So in Los Angeles, there is building momentum around sustainability and green schoolyards. Our advocacy work is really a jumping off point from the renewable energy resolution that was passed in 2020 that was all created by parent advocates, where LAUSD is committed to going solar by 2030 and to be off natural gas by 2040. The upcoming UTLA contract that's being negotiated in the fall, one of the key demands is healthy green public schools. We've had many school board resolutions that have been passed around green schools, outdoor learning, and climate literacy. And we're really advocating for how these resolutions can move into the implementation and funding stage. And we have a new superintendent who's actually very vocal and supportive of school greening. We're also excited about how, even though LAUSD is a state-run school, how our greening and sustainability initiatives can overlap with city initiatives so they can be better coordinated, since we have many of those, from a Green New Deal to pollinator pathways to a countywide sustainability plan. We have a stormwater parcel tax, and we have a mandated state composting law as well.
So just one kind of summary kind of theme that we talked about is, in my experience from my work and just seeing this work playing out, is there are two main arenas you need to be having kind of robust efforts in order for this work to really work. You need to have the infrastructure at place, but you also need to have the school and local culture on board. And so it just seemed kind of interesting that right now, Alleigh's coming more from this infrastructure as their entry point, because it's so obvious the work that needs to be done there. Whereas we have fine schoolyards, Nancy's seen them, they're okay. But we are definitely lacking in that culture. And for us, I see the entry point being culture. So it was just kind of an interesting thing to think, what is your entry point, one of these kind of main arenas to start going? Of course, you need both always, but it helps to pick the one that would kind of get things, the momentum going. Any final words, Aleigh?
No, just that this is really rewarding work. It's a really wonderful way to work with parents and students and teachers, and seeing how people kind of get excited about this, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize that there's this opportunity, and then you start talking about it and kind of describing what things could be like, and they're like, oh yeah, I see that now, I see what's possible. And that change and how people think about public space is really exciting.
Thank you so much, Aleigh and Joanna, not only for being here and taking the time to sort of compress all of your work into just a short presentation, but for the ongoing work that you're doing. It is so needed. So I'm wondering, and if others have questions, please put them in the chat. I know that there are barriers in, at least in Southern California. I'm familiar with some of those. And have you been able to break through some of those barriers to making this a reality? And if so, what has that experience been?
So one barrier that one of the big ones I'm finding with parent advocacy is bandwidth. I mean, it's just a precious commodity, especially having a 5 and 7-year-old who actually are home because my 7-year-old has COVID. It is a delicate balance. And so as a curriculum specialist, I looked for the way, like, what's the tipping point, a guide. So with teachers, I'm trying to do it to get them to do hands-on student-led work, but for parents, what's the bit to get them in? So I did create kind of a parent advocacy guidance. Like, if you just have 5 minutes, do this, sign this petition. You've got a couple more, here are all the emails for our school board members. So making it making the barriers as minimal as possible. And what I found is people really took to that document. So we actually used it again later when we had some mask advocacy going on, that kind of model. So I'll put that document in the chat for folks to see. And also I'll throw the scorecard in there so you can see how we set that up. And then if anybody ever wants it to send you a copy to try to use that, I can talk you through how that worked. And maybe if you guys want to talk through a model to have on your site somewhere. But yeah, figuring out what is the way to just get people started and over whatever that first barrier is.
Some of the materials that Joanna has created are linked in our district pathway resource. So we love the work you guys are doing.
I think for us, the barrier has been that there just hasn't been enough people showing support for this. And so in the past 6 months, showing up to school board meetings and developing relationships with school board members, so that there's this kind of really wanting to also like educate them on like why this is important and why it's important to us and why it's important to students, so we can have this kind of shared common language. And the more that they've been hearing about it, their interest in it deepens, and it starts moving up on the totem pole of what they are seeing as important. And there was a school board member who initially didn't want to engage around schoolyards because she wanted to focus on equity, even though she's starting to see there's this connection between equity and green schoolyard. So just having that patience and playing kind of like a longer game of developing those relationships for people to gain your trust and to just being able to constantly engage in this conversation. I know a huge barrier in Los Angeles is that for many of the schoolyards that they asphalted, they would just kind of dump whatever type of like dirt as infill under the asphalt. And this was before they would like test dirt or even know like what was in it. So there's so many schoolyards that have this very toxic infill underneath the asphalt, which is a huge barrier to us because the remediation process for removing that soil just adds like a minimum $300,000 to $500,000 just to get rid of that. So the district is very reluctant to engage in depaving, understandably, but we're kind of at a point where it's like, but we have to engage in this conversation because kids have to be able to go outside. There's a cutoff point often at 90 degrees. A lot of kids are kept inside for lunch, recess, PE. So many schools don't have gyms or auditoriums just because we're Los Angeles. So we don't have a lot of that inside infrastructure. We just expect everything to be outside. So we really are at a critical turning point where we just really have to engage in these hard conversations around depaving and how we're going to actually deal with that.
I do want to add real quick before we move on to the next question. This is also a prime moment for parent advocacy because we all have this ubiquitous platform. I mean, these meetings exist, and I met Aleigh because of Zoom and how we all have it now. And so I'm having a meeting tonight for parents around the county that just wasn't possible before the pandemic. So I would say it is a perfect time to try to organize because you can really suddenly surprise a district with a lot of cohesive, organized momentum, and they struggle to ignore that. And it's good to be the positive kind as opposed to the aggressive kind. So
Yes, thank you so much, Joanna and Aleigh, for all the work that you're doing, and as Erica in the chat says, for being such leaders for us all, for all of us parents. Thank you again.
Love hearing that you guys met in the community of practice. That's so cool. That really makes us happy.
We did. We hit it off, and then we like immediately started emailing. And then when we met last week, this all came to light. So yeah,
That's really, really powerful stuff. Good work.
Yeah. It's a great bookend on the 50th session too, I think, and thank you for all the work that you're doing in both places.